1.6 billion in total transactions over 24 hours. There is kind of a watershed moment in that moment in time. I like to think about us as a wealth management team for art and collectibles, or a multifamily office for art and collectibles.
But I think there's always an apprehensiveness because there's this perception that there's like insiders and outsiders. How do individuals or families navigate that?
It can be intimidating. There is an inherent undertone of a little closed, maybe a little snobbish. You explore with education. There is a good, better, best strategy within the context of the object itself. It's about training your eye.
Do you find that people who buy art over time, they start to think of themselves like, I should be collecting?
That's a great question.
You know, like,
I think most folks do not think of themselves as collectors, but it's our job as the advisor to begin to give or provide education on what it means to truly collect.
What is your golden rule when advising?
In our world, it's due diligence, due diligence, due diligence.
The information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, or professional advice. The views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any organization or company. The host and guests may maintain positions in any securities discussed on the podcast. Always consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional before making any investment decisions.
Carlos, we're back. Episode 3.
episode 3. Sorry to have missed episode 2. I was on a vacation, but
You're not allowed
happy
to
to be
take
back.
vacation. Well, today we had the privilege of speaking with Shane David Hall, who is director of the high-profile private client division for the Fine Art Group. Fine Art Group is a major thought leader in the world of art and collectibles. Shane's job is to counsel and advise, along with his team, high net worth individuals and families throughout the world. They've got offices all over the world today. Fascinating conversation, I thought,
fascinating
about the art
conversation. We learned a lot about the state of the luxury art world, as well as a little bit about the other areas that they cover, like collectibles, watches, jewelry, etc. And we really learned a lot about like the nuances. There's so much more to collecting than just the buy or even, you know, the eventual sale. And I think you'll learn a lot. We learned a lot, and it's just I walked away thinking, wow, this is why you need to hire a firm like the Fine Art Group if you're serious about collecting.
Same,
art.
yeah, that was my thought as well. Well, we hope you enjoy our discussion with Shane David Hall from the Fine Art Group. Thank you and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the On Point podcast.
Man, thank you for having me.
We know quite a bit about the Fine Art Group, but for those that are tuning in and are not familiar with the Fine Art Group, would love to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. A little bit about myself, kind of background. Began my career in the auction industry at Sotheby's. Worked a number of years for a mid-tier domestic firm here in the U.S. before moving into a private single-family office that had holdings or interest in the art and collectibles space. With that firm, I helped develop 2 departments that, took an organization that was originally focused primarily on a single asset class, and we built out a fine art department and a 20th century design department at that time, and then moved over to a secondary firm that they had purchased in St. Louis, Missouri. That was about 10 years ago now. And so, roughly 10 years ago, I moved over to private advisory, and never looked back. And currently sit with the Fine Art Group. I am the director of the high profile division, a director of business development within the firm. And we're the largest appraisal and advisory firm for art and luxury assets in the world. 5 core verticals there. We help clients with appraisal, understanding value. We do that across the board, from replacement value, working hand in hand with our friends in that risk management space or underwriters. We work hand in hand with wealth management teams, trust and estate folks, accountants, so forth and so on, from a long-term planning perspective or strategy around these assets. Fact of the matter is, we're talking about maybe 10 to 15% of the balance sheet that typically is unmanaged or unguided. So very deep in that valuation space. We work from very simple projects to super complex. Similarly, help clients buy and sell. A lot of due diligence there, a lot of discipline, a lot of education, what it means to engage with the market appropriately, both from a buy-sell perspective. Big collection management team. There are about 5 registrars that sit around the world for the firm, and that team is helping manage collections, move collections, manage shipping, oversee museum exhibitions and loans, and we oversee or steer an object from a collector that we advise into a retrospective, an exhibition, or a larger academic setting. So very hands-on there in the who, what, when, where, and why of the art or the object itself. And then, we're a financial firm as well. So I like to think about us as almost as we are a wealth management team for art and collectibles, or a multifamily office for art and collectibles. We're there to give subject matter expertise to our friends and folks who are truly in that wealth management space. And with that comes deep, deep insight into what is art as an investment asset class, as well as a credit facility. So the goal of the firm, holistic, 360, really built to advise collectors in a transparent manner. The verticals aside, there are some key factors about what we do that I think is very important for the nuanced, what is a nuanced market and what is an unregulated market, right? So at the end of the day, we are compliance driven. We have a full commercial team. We have in-house legal counsel. We have extensive E&O and intellectual risk management products that guard or steer how we put together an appraisal or advise a client. We do not hold inventory. We are meant to be an unbiased thought leader in the space, guiding and steering collectors so that they feel protected in an area of the industry that is the Wild West at times, and certainly has its fair share of bad actors.
Amazing. Well, it's amazing how many moving parts there are to what you do and what the Fine Art Group does. So obviously, we spend most of our days focusing on investments and the markets generally. And I want to just touch on that high level because you have a really unique perspective where you sit on what is going on in the art and collectibles market broadly. And then in the context, putting that in the context of the economy and the markets. So clearly we've been in a world arguably since back in 2008, 2009, but most certainly since COVID era, where the world seems to be awash in liquidity. Asset prices have significantly increased in value across the board, whether it's stocks or real estate or art in many cases. And we've read some news recently about how maybe that is perhaps slowing a little bit in the art world, but would love to hear your perspective on just what the economic measures we've seen over the last years have done to the art and collectibles world and what that means for your business.
Absolutely. So I think first and foremost, it's important to keep in mind, this is a $70 billion industry. Trade happens globally, primarily in New York, London, and Hong Kong. Those are the hot spots, right? And then we see that trade boil down to, regional fairs and dealers and so forth and so on. So we all, think about Art Basel Miami or upcoming Art Basel Paris, which, is at the top of the leaderboard for everyone as we move into the fall. COVID was a really interesting time for the market because, like the financial industry, we did see a downturn there. We saw the industry really shut down, post-March of 2020, moving into closures and the pandemic itself. But come June of 2020, we started to see the train kind of come back on the tracks. Major sales begin to take place. Folks begin to consign, deals transition. There are a number of factors as to why we saw that ramp up so quickly, right? So there's a democratization of the art world. There's access that we've never had before, right? You can sit in your living room and you can bid on an object at 3 a.m. I was on the plane yesterday and got a notice from an auction platform that I bid on. My lot was coming up. I'm on the Wi-Fi. I logged on and I bid, from 30,000 feet, right? That's where we sit, right? That's the ecosystem. And you have this great interest in objects on a whole. So post-spring, moving into the fall auction season, we saw a buildup of important objects coming to market into 2021 and 2022. It was a perfect storm of single owner sales, excellent caliber material, just the best of the best, top in class. And that created a lot of interest. It created a lot of buzz about what was happening in the space. And we noticed and certainly saw that prices were driving up significantly. There is kind of a watershed moment in that moment in time, and in fall of 2022, we kind of look at the height of the market, and that would have been the Paul Allen sale, single owner sale at Christie's, which was 1.6 billion in total transactions over 24 hours at the auction house.
So let's talk about that for a moment. What happened there? I mean,
so best of the best, right? So, incredible collection from a penultimate collector. We know over time that Paul Allen was putting together a collection that made significant impact to the art market. He was looking for the top in class or the best example of a work by artists that fit his collecting profile.
What was that collection?
Blue chip works of art, right? So blue chip across the board. And so exactly. And so we're looking at, anything from a great Picasso to, a fabulous Georgia O'Keeffe, you name it. Right. It was an incredible collection with a diversified price point as well. So certainly there's objects
why did that come to market? Do you think it was sort of taking advantage of a hot market, or he passed?
Yeah, he passed. Yeah, and so the estate was divesting, and there was a charitable component built into the estate. So we knew that the objects were going to come to market with the intention that 100% of the proceeds would revert to charitable contribution, which we know happened. In this instance, it was perfect timing. It was like a perfect storm because we're finishing the end of the pandemic. The market is opening more broadly globally. We've seen a ramp up of important objects flow into those evening sales at Sotheby's and Christie's. We've seen a ramp up of these important single owner sales where you have 20, 30, 40 really lovely objects within the context of a private collection. The market always favors things that come from a singular space and are fresh to market. This was, hundreds of assets from a very important collector where the industry had watched that collection be built from ground up, and collectors had positioned that collection as an ultimate goal, right? I'm here. That's where I want to be. I want a collection like Paul Allen too. And this was an opportunity to begin acquiring things that had not seen the market in some time, but were the best of the best. They were the museum quality objects that are incredibly desirable and, do come to market at times, but less regularly today. That was the watershed moment, quite frankly. It was the height of the market. And at that point, we began to see transition, right? We began to see. So
that auction actually went very well.
It went incredibly well.
Post that auction.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's not coincidence that at that same time, if we're talking about late 2022, interest rates were moving up quickly as the Fed was fighting inflation. So we deal a lot with liquid public markets, but that was a tough year.
That's right. Moving into 2023. And with that, inflation certainly will impact the art market. Collectors do typically look at these assets as a stronghold, an ability to position money in an object where you have a long-term hold with continued gain over time. That long-term hold is certainly more extended than you would find in any security or a similar illiquid investment. But at that moment in time, with these objects coming to market, we did see a shift, right? After 2023, with that increase in inflation, objects begin to stay more private. Clients begin to think a little more conservatively about what they were buying or bidding on in the marketplace. And then you factor in all of the other contributing factors to owning an object. So while the market value remains stable for an elongated period of time, the fact of the matter is all of the ancillary services that surround these objects, shipping, storage, framing, conservation, those costs are ratcheting up at the same time. And it creates a moment in the market where clients become more conservative, right? I think interestingly, there's been a shift in recent years, past 2024, 2025. Collectors are moving away from, and not Not in total. The blue chip objects within the space are still the blue chip objects within the space, and they're the best of the best, just like a blue chip stock. But at the same time, we're finding that there's diversification as well. And so collectors are beginning to look at luxury handbags and jewelry and watches and wine as ways to diversify their collectibles portfolio, and certainly not putting all of their eggs in one basket. There was a report that came out this week from the major auction houses where they have tracked a trend in Gen Z buyers moving away from fine art or broadening their collecting scope, focusing on these alternative luxury assets as well.
We've certainly we've seen that among some of the younger folks in our network or client base as well. I think that's right.
Watches and cars seem to be
absolutely
very much of interest.
And you can go deeper there, right? It's luxury watches and cars, kind of sit at the top of the food chain, but what about sneakers, or what about memorabilia, sporting memorabilia, right? From 2019 into probably 2023, we saw a really significant increase in values related to trading cards. The markets evolve over time.
Music to my ears. I used to trade cards when I was a little kid. Talked about
I still have a lot.
My mom,
they're in the app.
Mom threw them away.
Oh man, classic story.
Thinking they were worthless. So it's a lesson to me. But actually, quick question on that, because there's been a lot of wealth created in the crypto space. We moved into the art collection or collectible collection?
Yeah, in 2019, 2020, we did see a rise in the NFT market. There was a lot of talk around these digital assets, the non-fungible tokens, so forth and so on. That market's definitely, let's say, stabilized. There was a significant downturn due to the decrease in value from cryptocurrency in, what was that, 2021?
But I guess unpacking your question a little bit, has that generation of sort of crypto, of wealthy crypto investors who tend to skew younger, have they become art collectors?
Yeah, I think that there's an inherent interest there, right? You're already in the crypto space, and so you're looking at the digital asset as well. Absolutely. Is the market stable? Unlikely, right? There's a lot of volatility in the space, lots of ups and downs. It's not an area of the collectibles market right now where we would say, yes, that's a place where we would look for, long-term hold, return on investment, and so forth.
I just think of like the guy who bought the banana on the wall in Basel. He was a crypto guy.
Yeah, which just sold again at Sotheby's. Yeah, or in fall of last year, and I'm forgetting the exact value of the resale, but it was quite significant. And the ROI on that thing from buying it at Basel to selling it at Sotheby's fall, November of 2024 was a rather significant differential. And that's a really interesting case study, because it is an object that had incredible following while at Basel. I think that was maybe 2016 or 2017. It was the asset of Basel that year. And I remember, at that time, all the major trade publications, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, were discussing a banana taped to the wall at Art Basel, Miami, right? Fast forward a couple of years.
On a life of its own.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's one thing you mentioned earlier that I want to explore a little bit, and that's this idea of art and collectibles being a largely unregulated market. We talk to a lot of clients, families. Some are collectors and have significant collections of art or collectibles. Others are kind of interested in the space, but I think there's always an apprehensiveness because there's this perception that there's like insiders and outsiders, and that there's potentially a lot of, let's call it market manipulation, right? Sure. Where it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that if certain people get involved with an artist or whatever it may be, that they can propel that pieces associated with that individual to another level. Mm-hmm. So how do individuals or families navigate that if they're not currently, let's say, within that universe, and they're interested in becoming a part of it, but they're scared about the perceived potential for manipulation and insider and outsider status? what do you do?
Yeah, I think that, clients, no matter where they sit, collectors, no matter where they sit in the ecosystem, if you've not engaged with the market, it can be intimidating, right? There is a inherent undertone of, a little closed, maybe a little snobbish, a little too refined. Oh gosh, those are not my people, so forth and so on. And what we really encourage clients to explore, right? You explore with education at the end of the day. Most collectors, as they're entering the market, they need someone on their side who doesn't have vested interest in the transaction or the trade, right? You need someone there to help guide you through the knowledge of art or the asset itself, really provide some education on what are the hierarchies of the object. In reality, when we're thinking about art as an asset class, there is a good, better, best strategy within the context of the object itself. Is it the best example of the artist's work, or is it something more mundane, right? Is it something where the artist had an off day and the market doesn't really favor that object, or it's a piece from a series that the market doesn't favor, and something along those lines? You're really looking at education. It's about training your eye and understanding where these pieces fit into the greater context of the oeuvre itself, for lack of a better term. And then it's about getting out, right? And so we encourage our collectors to travel with us. Come to the major auctions in New York in November. Let's go to London and see what's available in the spring set. We have a team of probably 6 advisors headed to Basel, Paris in fall with clients in tow so that we can see objects, we can review objects, and we can educate those clients on what is an object that would be asset value worthy, essentially. It's similar. We do the same thing from a jewelry and watch perspective. My jewelry specialist, the head of our jewelry department for North America, is traveling with a jewelry collector throughout the spring and the winter and spring of this year to major shows, exhibitions, and other venues to see, touch, and experience objects. It is art education 101 at the end of the day. And once you've built that knowledge and that base, that foundation of this is the industry, these are the objects, these are the key players, this is the theme, market follows, right? It's that understanding of what is value, what does value mean? And I like to say, if we do our job correctly, if we're truly educating collectors and we're there to support them through that acquisition phase, we're there to give them knowledge and insight to the market, they're going to be as knowledgeable as their specialist when all said and done, right? Like, this is a passion sport at the end of the day. Passion and value can run in tandem with one another. It's not a dirty word, right? So many collectors think that, or feel that, the idea of making an acquisition with value in mind is a conflict to the idea of buying art. But in reality, these things overlap with one another. And that should be considered, right? We should be buying something that really sparks your curiosity. We should be building collections that, service that desire and the soul around collecting. But at the same time, we have to think about all the other facets of what those assets mean. And that is where asset value comes into play. Mm-hmm. There is a dovetail there.
That dichotomy between like passion and value, I find that so interesting. Do you find that like most people who buy art, do they start as buyers of like, oh, I really like that and that, and then they over time they start to think of themselves like, I should be collecting?
That's a great question.
It's a chicken and egg here.
Yeah,
progression.
I think it's hard for folks to think of themselves as collectors, right? It doesn't matter how sophisticated you are, how successful you may be. I think at the end of the day, if you open up the Wall Street Journal and there's a $160 million Picasso on the front page that sold at a fall evening sale in New York the night before, there is a wall there. It doesn't matter if you can afford the $160 million Picasso or not. So I think most folks do not think of themselves as collectors, but it's our job as the advisor to begin to give or provide education on what it means to truly collect and to broaden that scope, right? And to think beyond what it means to put the collection together But what is, what are the long-term goals of the collection? Do we have an exhibition mandate? Is there a philanthropic goal? Is there, are we building collection for generational interest? Are you collecting as a family? There are a lot of questions to answer around what it means to buy these assets and why. And certainly the elongated time of, they're not always just sitting on the wall, right? They're not always in the jewelry box. They're not always in the vault. What are we doing with them? What's the next step here? I think there are moments in time where we're educating collectors on what it means to also be a collector and to move them from that basis, that foundation of that's not my sport to, man, I really enjoy this. This is incredible. And, we're building family legacy at the same time. Does that?
Yeah. I think that's an amazing point about starting with the goals in mind.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way that we approach wealth management in general, right? Sometimes we'll go into a meeting with someone and they'll lead with, what are your rates of return, or what would you put in my portfolio? And we're like, well, what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah, that's right.
And so I think it's really interesting to see that parallel in the art world where it's the same general concept.
And I don't know if I would necessarily say it's a parallel with the art world, but it's certainly a parallel with the fine art group. I begin every client call, every discovery moment with a collector, with the team I'm working with of, the question is, well, what's the goal? Where are we headed? What's the problem we're solving? And how do we work backwards to solve that problem with you? How do we remain in a situation where this is a relationship and it is not simply transactionary? The fact of the matter is the art world is 95% transactionary. So to be relationship driven, to be educationally driven, turns the world on its head a little bit.
Absolutely. So switching gears slightly to, an issue that I think a lot of art collectors or investors encounter. I wanted to talk about liquidity a little bit.
Oh yeah,
because I think one thing that's very interesting about you and your colleagues is the thought and consideration that you put around liquidity needs for collectors, particularly as it pertains to estate planning.
Yeah.
Now, art and collectibles being illiquid in nature pose certain challenges around gifting, transfer, estate tax. Can you tell us a little bit about how you approach that?
Yeah.
A lot of the families that you work with have these considerations of what happens to this art collection over time, and how do we prevent estate taxes or other issues from eroding the value?
I think multi-pronged, right? So planning does not happen soon enough with most collections or collectibles. And so we have a team member, Colleen Boyle, she's our managing director, heads our philanthropic practice. And one thing that Colleen says constantly is, plan often, right? Plan well into the future and plan often. That plan changes over time, right? And so we all must be nimble in the how that plan may change or move from one desire to another with the family itself. How do you solve those problems, right? And there are two kind of key components here. So, mentioned earlier, we are a credit facility. We have one of the largest private credit facilities for art and collectibles in the world. And from a liquidity standpoint, these are objects that can be, it is an elongated timeline, a ramp for divestment, right? When we're thinking about divestment, when we're thinking about what sales strategy means or moving this asset from a hard asset to a liquid asset for a family member, there's a lot of due diligence that goes into that planning process. Is the object appropriate for a public sale or a private sale? What is the best marketplace? Would it be appropriate in a London day sale for British artists, or is this something that, we want to get to Hong Kong? Where are the right buyers? When's the time to sell? There's seasonality to what we do. Who are the top collectors? Have they seen this work? So many questions that we have to answer around that object. And if a collector is in a moment of, short-term need for liquidity, these objects can be very beneficial tools for a straight line credit facility, right? We will lend against blue chip works of art, jewelry, and watches. The term of that deal looks like it's an annual term, very cut and dry. But the funds are typically used for a myriad of purposes. Redeploying capital for new acquisitions, very common within the space as collections grow, and collectors find that the value of their collections have increased significantly, they may choose to pull some of that liquidity out in order to continue to build the collection. We see clients utilize that line of credit for estate taxes when need be. It decreases the need to divest or sell assets to satisfy the tax burden. Short-term bridge loans. I had a call about a week ago for a family who needed a short-term bridge loan for the acquisition of a new property in Martha's Vineyard, right? It really runs the gamut, and that can be a really nice problem solve for a lot of families and a lot of collectors when they're thinking about something that could be quick and simple. The counter to that is thinking about long-term strategy from a wealth planning perspective, right? How do these objects fit into the portfolio? Are they being managed? I think I mentioned earlier in our recording that, the assets within this category typically sit at about 10 to 15% of the balance sheet. And when we think about those assets, it typically means that the client's significantly over leveraged in the space. The sweet spot is like 8%, right? And, you typically find that there's a lot of value there. They purchased from an unguided perspective. They generally have no idea of where market has went. So there's a really interesting stat out there, and I want to say it's like 52% of collectors do not follow the market, right? They're not keeping tabs of, I bought the Rolex Submariner 2 years ago. Has it increased or decreased in value? Where's that sit today? Right. So, beginning to understand what, cost basis is to current market value today is the foundation of long-term planning. And then that moves us into ultimate goals, right? Are we building a collection that'll be divested at the end of life? Are these objects that will be donated to a receiving institution? They will meet mission. The client, the estate, will take a deduction, and the museum or institution will receive a lovely collection for an elongated period of time. How do you negotiate what those donation strategies look like, right? We'll get in and roll our sleeves up in working with a collector to help position objects appropriately. So we know that the guide to the museum is an accurate object that would meet their collecting mission. But we'll get under the hood and think about, well, is this something that's long term? Will it be hung? How long will the collector's name appear on the gallery wall? What does the endowment look like that comes with the object? There are a lot of categories there to kind of unpack as we work through that charitable contribution perspective. And then certainly on the opposite side of the coin, we're working hand in hand with a lot of donor advised fund structures where we're helping to transition those objects from being held within the collection to the fund, sold, and then redeploying the liquidity for charitable contribution. There are a number of ways to, kind of slice and dice this. What's really interesting is collecting tends to be a singular sport, right? So you tend to have one individual within a family context that's extremely passionate about. Exactly.
And that was actually something I wanted to ask about is, how do you advise families where there's a generational rift, if you will, between, perhaps patriarch and matriarch who are collectors and very interested in, whether it's art or whatever other vertical. And then maybe the next generation that doesn't share that passion, that interest. How do you advise, counsel, and reconcile that tension between the generations?
Family goals, right? It's the simple questions that we all encounter every day as we work with these interesting folks and families. It is, what is the end goal of the family, and how are we building legacy with one another? And how do you connect? How do you provide connective fiber between those generations? While, dad may be extremely interested in American landscapes and son is buying, sneakers, there is a way to begin thinking about, what are we going to do with dad's American landscapes, and how do we think collaboratively about next steps to these assets? There's one family that we've worked with and guided over the years where the collections among the generations are extremely different. They're excellent in terms of caliber and the objects within the collection. Sons have no interest in what mom and dad have collected. And so long-term strategy is to begin kind of rolling down that collection so that we can support a common alma mater among the generations, right? Multiple generations of one family have went through this university, and we are building connective tissue and legacy around these objects so that that family can continue to support an institution that's super near and, dear to their hearts.
That's a great idea to bring together.
How penetrated is your market? Meaning, what percentage you think of serious buyers, collectors are working with firms like yourself to really address all these important issues?
Yeah, man, Carlos, that's a great question. We're at an interesting moment in the space overall where collectors are wiser to the larger team environment that exists in the space, right? 20 years ago, it was common to work alone. You may work with an art advisor or a trusted, specialist or head of department at an auction house or something along those lines to help you build a collection or to think about those top tier assets. But, in the current market landscape and with complexity around wealth and family generation and certainly great wealth transfer at this moment in time, I think it is more and more common that we are part of that team, right? We're part of that team that centers the client, that sits around the table with the wealth team and the risk team and the T&E team and the tax team to help kind of guide and think critically about this particular portion of the balance sheet. It is, it's unregulated. It's an unregulated space. It is highly opaque at times. It is not always, a clear cut, way to, solving a problem. I often think about, I was at an event in Atlanta a few years ago and sat on a panel with a group of folks with a team, and there was a head of development from an institution that was also on the panel with us. And family had donated an object to the institution. It didn't really meet the mission of the institution. Never really got accessioned, interestingly enough, so it wasn't included in their collection database. Fast forward, 10 years or so, and grandson comes around and he says, well, my grandmother donated X to this, museum. I'd love to see it. It took the institution a couple of days to track down where this object was, because it didn't meet the mission. There was no real forethought. There was no planning around what it would mean to donate object to institution. And what would that institution do with it long term, right? We're there to help kind of unpack that transaction and to oversee that transaction so it's beneficial for everyone. The fact of the matter is that while you may sit on the board of a museum or an institution or a university, collecting habits change, missions change, and you may have a conversation with the director of a museum or the head curator of a department at one point where they say, yes, we would love to have your widget collection. Fast forward 10 years, that leadership could change and new leadership says, well, what are we doing with this stuff, right? We are extremely proactive from that perspective of deep conversation, long-term planning. Let's create strategy here. Let's get it in writing. Let's have elongated conversations with all of the players so we know where these objects are, headed at the end of the day. And that helps us to create, legacy. It helps us to create family mission, if you will. It helps us to create conversation among the generations. And it also helps folks like you, be super proactive when we're looking at, the dollars and cents at the end of the day.
Yeah. Shane, you'd alluded earlier to the idea that costs of maintaining and protecting collectibles and art have gone up over time alongside the inflation that we've seen in other goods and services. I'm actually really curious about the insurance, so the appraisal and insurance realm within the art world. Because I know we've seen insurance costs in just about everything have gone up considerably. You help and advise clients in that realm as well, both from an appraisal and an insurance perspective. What are the trends there? Have these costs gone up dramatically in recent years?
So I'll preface this. I'm not a risk advisor in any way, shape, or form. But
you have risk advisors.
We work hand in hand with folks in the risk space, and we enjoy deep relationships with national firms and boutique firms across the U.S. and really around the world, from underwriters to, those kind of brokers, advisors, as well. And I think there are a couple of trends in the space that we've certainly seen, in recent years. Trend number one, and, primarily due primarily due to natural disaster, there has been inflation in premiums and cost related to risk management, certainly related to real property, but we do see that price point ratchet up, if you will, related to art and collectibles as well, or what you would consider to be that scheduled articles policy, the fine art rider, right? Those numbers have increased in recent years. Certainly due to risk, right? Due to the fact that, we've had, 2 major devastating fires this year in California. We're in the midst of, hurricane season now, and I think there's a named storm, ready to go. And they're maybe calling that a category 3 with probably, knock on wood, probably no.
Projecting is going to take a turn.
No, exactly. No,
we've got
not making land.
We've got our business continuity plan.
Yeah, right.
It's on the table this time.
So, absolutely in that moment in time, when you start to think about the impact of natural disaster, geographic location, all of the other contributing factors to these objects and where they might sit in the context of a collection, we have seen those premiums increase. The underwriters themselves, as well as the brokers, are super proactive in helping families and collectors think proactively about how to, manage that rising cost. We're seeing an increased response from the underwriters where they're asking for revaluations or specific straight line replacement value appraisals for objects that may live in a sensitive geographic location that could be impacted by natural disaster. We are finding that most families are over responding to that in a very good way, where if they get a short list of 10 objects from their underwriter where it's the top 10 value of the top 10 value percentage of the collection, a lot of families are saying, okay, well, we're here, we're under the hood. Let's just revalue everything. Let's make sure our schedule's really up to date and toggle those switches of where have we seen gains in value, where have we seen stabilization in value, where have we seen maybe a decrease or a depreciation in value, just so we can have a full lay of land. We're also seeing, increased interest to emergency evacuation and planning around these objects. How do you appropriately stage that object for extraction prior to a natural disaster? And the reaction from the underwriters is oftentimes, a credit to the family when there's a really strong natural disaster plan in place or an emergency evacuation plan in place for these objects. There are discounts and premiums and so forth and so on that can be, impactful to a family at the end of the day. We do see an interesting trend related to jewelry and watches. Most of those riders, most of those fine art schedules have an automatically inflationary clause built into the value. That inflationary clause tends to ratchet numbers up very quickly. It tends to, step outside of the market or step outside of value faster than the market can change itself. And so a lot of what we do with our clients in the jewelry and watch space is revalue, review, and keep those numbers in line with the market. There have been times where I've seen that inflationary guard increase value by 25%, right? And so if we're talking about a $1.5 million object, we're now at $5.5 million. That's a pretty substantial differential. And if we can ratchet that back down and get it back in line with the market, get a little closer to where values are today, that can be helpful over the long term.
You mentioned replacement value, but there's also fair market value. Can you discuss the differences? Because you hear these terms sort of used interchangeably sometimes.
Absolutely.
But there are some key differences that I think our listeners should be aware of.
I love talking about value because it is probably a topic that is commonly confused and really misunderstood in our space. In reality, when we're thinking about art and luxury assets, these assets can have 4 different values, and value typically is dictated by the purpose. What is the goal? Why are we establishing value? When we think about value, I generally think about it in hierarchy, right? So replacement value sits at the top of the food chain, and it's a single use value. It's purpose driven. Replacement insurance. And that number is meant to be inclusive of all of the numbers, all of the additional factors that it would take to replace that object apples to apples, like for like today in the marketplace. You're typically relying on retail boutique gallery comparables, and you're factoring in additional cost of ownership or premium related to taxes and shipping and framing and so forth and so on, what will it take to make that client whole in a moment of loss? Your next step down is fair market value. And there's a lot of misconception among collectors and fiduciaries in the space about what replacement value is and fair market value and why they're used. Fair market value is the only value defined by the Internal Revenue Service, and it is willing buyer, willing seller, open marketplace. And the IRS defines that value can only be used for estate tax, probate planning, right? It is used for divorce. It is used for donation, and at times it may be used for sales strategy, right? That may be a number where a client would begin to look at the fair market value and in order to determine what would that object potentially realize in the marketplace should they sell. The next value down is what we consider to be marketable cash value. And the best way to think about that is, simply net return, right? When we think about fair market value is the tradable value public marketplace with premium built in. It's with buyer's premium. So there's an added 26% to that number. Marketable cash value is the same value minus the 26%. And so that is typically what we refer to for clients when we're thinking about net proceeds. What would be the take home if you chose to sell something? It is oftentimes the value that's used for collateral as well. And then you have sales estimates, which are oftentimes confused with appraised values or more official established USPAP compliant appraisal documents. A sales value or an estimate range, it's simply marketing, right? Those are the numbers that the auction houses would put together in order to perhaps incentivize a seller to sell, but certainly to incentivize a buyer to buy. These are marketing tools galvanized to incentivize interest in the object, right? You want to have something that is conservative, palatable, where somebody like me can say, "Ooh, gee, that's a great deal. I want to get in there." But then also you have, sophisticated collectors who are happy to see that object bid up to the high estimate and even maybe slightly over to realize or to take that object home with them. So it's really important to understand that differential in purpose. Clients are oftentimes very confused. It's not uncommon for me to hear, "Oh, gee, well, we never have appraisals done for risk management purposes because we're afraid of what that might mean from a taxation purpose with Uncle Sam," or something along those lines. And, these are specific, siloed values in order to really solve certain problems for individuals. And I think that, it's one of the most commonly confused or the biggest misconception within the valuation space is, how are we using these and why are we doing this at the end of the day?
Absolutely. Shane, what is your golden rule when advising clients?
What's that old rule in real estate? Location. In our world, it's due diligence, right? It is that understanding of let's go deep on the object before you pull the trigger, before you make the acquisition. Where has it been? Who's owned it? Where does it fit within the context of the market? Is it a great object and it's never been seen? It hasn't been seen by the market in 30 or 40 years. And the market would respond incredibly, positively to this object if it was available publicly. Or is it, something that's had, conservation and different treatments and, maybe fits within the mid tier of the artist output and is more common, right? It is, for us, that's that due diligence, right? It's the discipline around acquisition. Do your homework. Do not always trust the person who's selling the object, right?
Actually, it leads me to, it is an unregulated market. Sure. So is there a high incidence of fraud and deception?
There can be, absolutely. At the top of the market, certainly, they're good actors and good players within the space. And reputation means everything in our industry, right? Comes down to reputation due to the unregulated factor or nuances of the space itself. And when you're working with a blue chip gallery or a blue chip auction house or even a firm like ours, there there is inherent good relationships and reputation within that ecosystem. Going outside of that space, going to somebody who may be a sole proprietor or a singular individual who's engaging in the market on behalf of collectors, you may want to be more cautious, right? The fact of the matter is there's not a lot of firms out there who do what we do. It is almost a solo sport for a lot of folks in the space who would consider themselves to be professionals. And when we're guiding clients, we're thinking about what are the other contributing factors that help cement that relationship and bring it above board, right? So for us, that's, deep relationships with national organizations. We have deep vetted relationships that are contractually and compliance driven with both folks and organizations in the wealth space as well as the risk space. We truly believe that those relationships, the compliance driven relationship, that contractual driven relationship, helps to establish foundation and it underscore the reputation of the firm overall. Additionally, we have full in-house legal counsel that is reviewing documents, helping to craft appropriate agreements, helping us work through and wade through the negotiation of a deal or a transaction. Our commercial office is top in class. It's the best of the best in the industry. We are extremely risk driven, and those factors alone help to create that wall, right? It helps to insulate the collector from bad actors that could exist in the space.
And I'll tell you, I've been exceedingly impressed with just how thoughtful you and your organization are around those issues. I can't tell you how many times we've had conversations with people in the art world who, as you mentioned, are solo actors. Yeah. And, a client may be working with them. And so they'll say, I need a copy of their ID and this, sensitive information. And I say, okay, well, how do you store this information?
Yeah. Right.
Right. And there's been zero thought to how they store that information. So I'm like, we're not sending that information.
No, I would say we're a global organization, right? Yeah. Our headquarters are London. We have North American headquarters at Rockefeller Center, of course, here in the US, but we span the world, right? So from London, Brussels, Dubai, Hong Kong, team in Sydney, and then across North America, we're servicing collectors around the world. We are a UK-based organization. And so as you know, compliance and regulatory needs within the UK are a little more stringent than what we typically find here in North America. We're very proactive in terms of, data security and so forth and so on, of course, right? Similarly, there are 125 specialists on our team around the world. So no matter what we are looking at, if it's an old masterwork of art or an emerging artist that a client is interested in at a fair, to jewelry, watches, wine, cars, sporting memorabilia, we have the ability to service those collectors holistically within, right? And so what you find oftentimes in the space or the industry is that collectors are kind of piecing it together, right? They have their art guy over here and, we work with this estate jeweler in our hometown and we trust them deeply. And so that's our guy. But I'm also buying trading cards from this person and I don't know if they're graded or not, so forth and so on. We are able to build that team internally and support the collector holistically, no matter what that need would be, right? So from vetting a potential acquisition to transportation to overseeing what goes to fine art storage to thinking strategically about long-term strategy and planning of these objects, we build the professionals and the team to support that family and their goals. Sometimes we may have an object or a client where there are a couple of hands that touch that family, right? A person like me, the relationship holder, a project manager, maybe a registrar. Other times, a team could be 10 folks deep, right? There's a very complex family that we work with where the collection is important and, top in class. It's the best of its kind. There are a lot of moving parts and pieces to this particular collection. And there are, somewhere between probably 6 and 8 hands that touch that family on a regular basis, including our president of the Americas, right? So it doesn't always just stop at the talent or at the team who has the interest. It is oftentimes, you're direct to CEO and president and the founder of the firm in many instances. We really work to create an environment where clients are truly supported across the board.
Sort of looking at the whole ecosystem of the art market and thinking about the major players, artists, collectors, gallerists, the auction houses, significant art fairs, museums. Like, how is the art world that ecosystem changing over time? Are any groups becoming more powerful? Are you seeing any trends as we sort of look ahead?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, Carlos, because what I think we're tracking as a portion of that industry that is becoming more visible or maybe more powerful is the art advisor. 20 years ago, clients were not always working with advisors, but more and more, given to the irregularity in the space, given the nuance that exists within the space, there is a greater lean on professional services like ours, right? It is that collectors want the transparency. They want the access. They want to know that someone is aligned with them. Someone has their best interest at heart. You're not just making a sale. And so that purpose, the role of the art advisor is oftentimes to broaden the depth of the collector and to really give them the transparency and the access that they desire. I think that's really the forefront, of the space right now. Definitely.
You guys are right in the forefront. That's fantastic.
Man, it's been great to see the growth of the firm, and our trajectory over time has been incredible to watch. And what we do is extremely similar to what you do, right? We're cousin in a lot of ways because we're there almost as a fiduciary for collectors. We're there to support and guide and educate opposed to just engaging in the market.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective.
So Shane, before we wrap up, a couple quick fire questions for you.
Yeah.
How about an underrated art destination?
Underrated art destination. A lot of folks are very interested in Mexico City now, currently, right? Contemporary emerging artists practicing in Latin America, certainly super interesting and viable at this moment in time. We are coming off summer season, so there's a lot of interest in those kind of small resort regional fairs that exist. We had teams at Seattle Art Fair this summer, as well as the Aspen Art Fair, that's a great little the Aspen Art Week. That's a great little pocket of global players who go into that mountain town, and there are world-class dealers and artists and educational events and panel talks and, just really, a really wonderful way to connect with the market. I think collectors are more and more and more looking for those opportunities where it is a little more intimate. It's a little more one-to-one. And some of those smaller fairs like Aspen Art Week and Intersect really give collectors that opportunity. For my, dime for dollar, that's absolutely.
What about the best hidden museum or gallery that you've ever visited?
Maybe a loaded question. I just finished touring the Frick after reopening, post their multi-billion-dollar restoration and renovation of that building in New York. And while a pretty permanent collection, impeccably done. Absolutely. Here in your backyard, right, we've got the Perez, and a number of really good institutions locally.
I really like the Clark at Williams College.
Oh yeah, that's right. And Bowdoin has a really great university collection, as well. That's a fabulous little museum. So there's a lot of under the radar spots.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Shane.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
The information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, or professional advice. The views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any organization or company. The host and guests may maintain positions in any securities discussed on the podcast. Always consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional before making any investment decisions.